What's up, everybody? Hey, what's up? Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast, the place where gaming meets comics, meets sports, meets movies, as well as entertainment. I'm doing this right. A little something different. Of course, I'm your host, King Von Jr. Of course, you can follow me on social media on Twitter/X at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow me on Instagram. Of course, you can also follow the show's Twitter page at Victory Pod One. I'm also on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Instagram page at Victorious One of course, at Victorious One's podcast. I'm also the social media producer for Perfect Flex Talk Radio, hosted by by friend of the program Mike Knox on Mondays at 6 p.m. So a little bit of a change of pace, if you will. Um, kind of experimenting, trying something a little new, a little different. Of course, with Evie Mux. I guess of course, it's a bit of a bit of a change from StreamYard. But like I said, I'm gonna checking this out to see what see what's all go, see what's good with this one. Yeah, I should have just go ahead and change my name. All right, let me see if I can. Anyway, just trying to same market, but anyway. But yeah, like I said, sorry about that. Of course, like I said, 301 King Von Jr. That's why I usually have it, at the bottom of the screen. But yeah, like I said, I said, trying something a little bit different. Let me see what I can do with this. Just to let people know. But sorry about that. But like I said, as far as as far as tonight's show, I talk about, of course, rest in peace to, to Hayden Panetierre. For those that, for those that don't know, she was, like one of the, of course, she was known for several roles. Matter of fact. So, there you go. Yeah. So those are my handles. But yeah, like I said, as far as that's concerned, like I said, of course, there's several things I want to talk about. As far as just like I said, first off, rest in peace to of course, to the Hayden, out. That was rough. That was unbelievable. I know the internet has showered her. So many tributes, so much love. Um, like it's been absolutely amazing. The outpouring of love that she's received, and she'll be greatly missed. Um, of course, my thoughts and prayers go out to her as well as her family. And so, like I said, of course, I want to start off with that, but also in other, let's say, entertainment news, if you will. We also saw that, of course, saw the casting for for X Men, for the MCU X Men. So thankfully, we officially have, of course, actually, let me see if I can change the screen. Nope, that's not it. But yeah, like I said, as far as that, All right, so yeah, like I said, as far as that, yeah, like I said, that's definitely like I said, that's definitely gonna be pretty big. And so, as a matter of fact, let me look at the rest of the X Men casting, and of course, Adam Driver has been confirmed to play Mr. Sinister, and the thing is, he has a history of telling Marvel no when it comes to their ideas, but it's only so many no's that you have in your system before eventually it's like eventually gonna you know, of course, we're eventually gonna end up saying yes at some point. So let me see, X Men. Here is the casting. Oh, and by the way, we already know that Sadie Sink, of course, gonna be playing Jane Grey. For those who don't know, of course, she was, of course, she first became known as Stranger Things, as well as Lucas is, like she was clone, of course, being the girlfriend of Lucas, so yeah, of course, she also played, like I said, she played Jane Grey in the latest Spider-Man Brand New Day. So we've already gotten the first glimpse of the MCU X-Men, through her. Let me see, like I said, Sadie Sink is of course, like I said, outside of Channing Tatum playing Gambit, but so another story. But like I said, we have Sadie Sink as Jane Grey. We have Christopher Abbott as Professor Charles Xavier. Not that familiar with his work like that. Of course, Samara Weaving as Emma Frost. Right on point, right on the nose. I think they really knocked that one out of the park as well. That was another home run. Kit Connor as Cyclops. Great choice. We also have Indy Navarrete as Rogue. Love it. Of course, Maya Boy. This is the one that a lot of people have really paid attention to the most, as you can see in this background. Of course, she's been confirmed as Storm, and like I said just now earlier, Adam Driver as Mr. Sinister, and so these are definitely perfect casting, and oftentimes Marvel does not miss when it comes to the casting. The thing is, like these roles are tailor made for the actors and actresses that they choose. So whoever they pick, they have a great reason why they selected them. And so yeah, like I said, as far as that, um, and also it's been confirmed that the X Men, MCU X Men is gonna be released in May of 2028, exactly 20 years after the MCU first launched with Iron Man. So it's officially a whole new era, a whole new chapter in the MCU, like one we've never seen before. So it's pretty much a reboot or relaunch or whatever the case may be. You know what I mean? And speaking of the MCU, let's go into it right now. As and so on, and of course, um, when Thor tells him In this one, Doctor Doom, does the same thing, or like I said, pretty much like almost like side by side, pretty much. Doom raises arms, and instead of unleashing missiles, he raises up sentinels. I was like, oh, and just you know, the cinematography just it's going to be absolute masterpiece. And it's already breaking like pre-sale ticket records and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So I know that this is going to be, um, one for the ages, one to remember. It's definitely going to be something, very legendary experience. And and I always said that Secret Wars, is the other big, major Marvel war besides Infinity War. And I think that this movie is definitely going to show, is definitely going to prove why it, like saying why it deserves to, to be, revered. Why Doctor Doom deserves to be revered the way he needs to, like I said, of course, in the comics, and for them to keep that same energy from the comics into the MCU, and one more play out in 720 HD, right, makes it even more impressive. And if you look at just the attention to detail, that they put into um, uh, so, that they put into his costume, that they put into the hood, like I said, all those different patterns. I said, yeah, it's pretty special, and this outfit, the design is definitely grown on me, right? It's like when you see, um, it's like you know. When you see, when you see a new pair of sneakers, right? So initially, initially you may not, initially you seem like you almost like you may want to pass on it, but over time you see it enough over and over, where the design like really starts to grow on, right? It reminds me of when I first got the when I first got when I first got those those red Jordan threes, the Chicago threes. So like initially I walked past walk past any shoe store, Foot Locker, Foot Action, whatever, Snipes, whatever, and initially I was like, that's way too much red. But over time, after I saw them at the All Star game, at least after enough time, just like, what, I'm starting to get more used to it, right? Eventually to the point where I end up, in the buying them myself. And like I said, first glance you're like, all right, whatever. But then over time, like I said, it's like it really grabs your attention, really catches you, and that's how it was, with shoes. In the same way, when it comes to this design, right? Especially when it comes to the armor, not just the hood, but especially like the part about the armor. Initially, like with the sleeves, I'm like, all right, whatever. But then, as I see it play out with these trailers, I'm like, yeah, all right, yeah, this is business is definitely picking up with this one. So, like I said, so of course, with that being said, I know that Avengers Doomsday is going to do, amazing numbers, and not only that, but just with Doctor Doom's authority, in this trailer, with the way that he just punks Thor and just you know uh, plucks him off like a booger. I said, oh yeah, you know, Doom's about to win this one you know, in 4. Instead of Knicks in 5, it's gonna be Doom in 4. And this trailer just further just cements that. And and clearly, um, we can see, you know, uh, the signs of, like I said, the signs of, Doom and Reed Richards' history. You know what I mean? And with the way that Reed's asking, did you do this? I'm like, oh, this got to be way more to this. It's got to be, like, of course, one of the theories is that this is going to, like I said, not only is obviously Secret Wars, which is now officially started filming, by the way. Not only is it going to lead to Secret Wars, but it looks like this is going to lead to the incursions and battle world. For those that that follow the comics and understand the source material, you would know exactly what that is. And so that this could definitely plant seeds for for the eventual battle world. And so the point we got going to end up having Avengers versus X-Men, and I am all for it. I am absolutely all for it. You know what I mean? And so yeah, you know what I mean. Like it's just like, I mean, it's just like one of those things where you just, it's just like one of those things you pretty much just get ready for the ride. And it's definitely going to be a journey. In more ways than one, to say the absolute very least. Um, and so now it is time to go into the weekend wrestling. I want to say that I have covered as much ground as I can when it comes to, an entertainment standpoint. And for those that are watching by way of Twitter, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate that. And if you happen to be on YouTube, youtube.com / at Von Resper Jr. Of course, please make sure to like, subscribe for more great content. And so yes, that's pretty much what it is. And when it comes to, of course, I want to start things off with Friday Night SmackDown. I would just say this episode is definitely like I said, the recent WWE has been turning up the heat when it comes to the weekly shows, when it comes to SmackDown as well as Raw. And so, of course, there were, apparently there's going to be upcoming double tapings for Raw and SmackDown, and definitely curious to see what that's going to be all about. And by the way, Pat McAfee's also announced that he will never, ever, of course, show his face in WWE ever again. Good riddance, especially with how bad, that like I said, it was on. Like I said, especially consider how bad that the WrestleMania was. When he interfered with the Cody and Randy Orton match, that storyline that didn't need to have you in it in the first place. But yeah, let me see. That is it. And yeah, so yeah, let me see this. And so, you know what? As a matter of fact, another thing I got to talk about as well. Like I said, like I said, of course, another. Let me see real quick. But also, another thing I wanted to mention, sadly, is, like I said, of course, so another thing I want to talk about as well, sadly, was in Los Angeles, we see that this is Um, yeah, so like I said, as far as that's concerned, it was at this moment, that the Lakers won their first out of at that time 5 championships during the '80s. You know what I mean? Like that's when the Showtime dynasty was established, was born, taking place, and of course this moment, of course it was ultimately, and like I said, this moment right here was ultimately the launching pad, if you will, um, for like I said, the launching pad for the Lakers not only to become a dynasty, but ultimately become a brand. And so yes, so as far as that, like I said, it's definitely be a sad day in franchise history that the Bus family is no longer running the team. And I was watching a podcast, Byron Scott, and of course, Older Polynice, who's a former player himself, and he said the Lakers were the last bastion of hope. I said, yeah, you use it's serious anytime using big words like that. The last ray of hope. You know what I mean? And the thing is that like seeing it like when it comes to make sure. Wow, yeah, definitely. I don't know what Facebook's doing with that. Like I said, my apologies for that. Um, but yeah, like I said, as far as that, you know, the Lakers, once under the Bus family, were, more like a family, like I said, more like a family-oriented business, mom and pop type of organization, and now it's just transactional. You know what I mean? Like the Bus family built relationships, with these players. Like I said, the one I just mentioned, and of course Magic himself. Like I said, him, Kareem, Shaq, Kobe, rest in peace. So many other players, and and so it's just like that aura, that feeling is not there, not going to be there anymore. And sadly, that's really it's going to be a dark blow, a huge blow for the NBA. And so yeah, like I said, as far as that's concerned. Da-da-da. Mm. All right, so yeah, so like I said, as far as that, um, and so like I said, of course, with that being said, and now other news, now it's time to get into of course, get into the week of wrestling, and so of course, when it comes to this week in wrestling, as far as SmackDown. We saw the latest from Cody Rhodes and Randy Orton. CM Punk and Kevin Owens, of course, face off again under one roof. We have the United States Championship match, Carmelo Hayes, versus Baron Corbin. We have the Women's U.S. Championship match, Tiffany Stratton versus JC Jane. And for the Tag Team Championships, of course, Damian Priest, R-Truth versus War Raiders versus MFTs, a triple threat. And we see that Nick Aldis and Chelsea Green kicked off SmackDown. We saw that Nick Aldis introduced WWE Women's Champion Chelsea Green to the ring to kick off the show, and wasted no time addressing her broken eye socket. And hesitantly, he asked that she relinquish the title. And so of course, Chelsea just delivered an amazing promo in which she talked about the sacrifice that she made. Of course, the way she was laughed at, and the laughter and the ridicule that she had to go through, that she endured, and how she came to work, and did her absolute best. And you know, regardless of you know how I may feel about her online exchange with Jade and all that stuff like that, um, you have to give credit where credit's due. Chelsea is a veteran. Um, she's someone who's working very, very hard. She's someone who's, like I said, very established. Someone who is able to, make the most out of whatever situation has been given to her. Like I said, she definitely brings that entertainment value. She's someone who can elevate the title itself. Just for being who she is. And I feel as though that the company. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Yeah. So yeah, like I say, she's someone who has the capacity to make the most out of what's given to her. Um, you know what I mean? I think that the company made the right move by keeping the title on her. You know what I mean? And so instead of just relinquishing it, because even though they very much could have, but the thing is, you know, at this stage of the game, with the way this division is in shambles, they pretty much need all hands on deck. Um, as we all know, of course, we all know, the caution queen herself, Naomi, is on maternity leave. Of course, her and Jimmy just had a son. Along with her fellow Big Three member, Bianca Belair, she's on maternity leave as well. Congratulations to both her and Montez, as they, also have a son as well. And so, which leaves, pretty much Jade on island, you know, on her own. Well, actually, no, Jade also has, BFAB and Meechin. But when it comes to these heavy hitters, like I said, of course, with with Bianca and Naomi, both being on maternity leave, as well as Rhea Ripley, being sidelined with an injury, um, it's looking very fragile right now. And so they need all they can get right now at this point. And so the best ability is availability, and Chelsea has shown that she is available. So it looks like it's going to be might as well take the interim off of her, off her name, off her title, and become the official, WWE, women's champion. Um, I definitely want to see a feud between her and Jade. Ultimately, personally, for me, I'd like to see Jade get the W in that aspect. But hey, it's pretty much like a life, pretty much a well deserved uh, reward for Chelsea's loyalty, and also she's definitely built a bit of a definitely built quite a following, after a WWE Unreal, so if anything, that's definitely put her in a whole different light, altogether. And so of course, as far as that, and of course, Nick Aldis ignored his GM intuition and agreed to give the champion to give Chelsea 30 days to get cleared. So she has a whole month, to recover. And of course, you see Gunther, of course, interrupt, and it was typical great heel self as he insulted both Nick Aldis, the guy that he beat at SummerSlam, and the injured champion, and drew out Matt Cardona, to defend his wife. And Gunther is naturally hilarious. As soon as like I said, as soon as Matt comes out, Gunther says, he said, of course, Matt came, of course, says he came all the way from catering, just to save the day. I said, wow. I was like, man, mm man, I was like, wow. Like I said, of course, like I said, Louis Sloan, the thing is, Gunther's just, like I said, Gunther's just naturally funny. Um, why? But yeah, like I said, mm, but yeah, like I said, as far as that's concerned, like so, I think Gunther just just has a natural sense of humor. Like I said, for him to say that that Mac came all the way from from catering to save her. I was like, wow. Yeah, I don't know about that, but yeah, as far as that's concerned, and so so at least at least Matt came out to defend the honor of his wife. Um, yeah, so it was definitely it was definitely great to see the ring general tap into that the element, and Chelsea Green's going to become the most beloved babyface in the women's division, and so as far as that's concerned. And of course, we also said that right after that, immediately we had Matt Cardona versus Gunther in a street fight. The winner of this match, obviously, Gunther. I mean, it's just like water's wet. Grass is green, the sky is blue. Gunther's going to win. You know what I mean? And so, of course, we have a few backstage segments with Charlotte and Alexa Bliss with a new partner, Tatum Paxley, who's anytime Alexa Bliss gets creeped out by you, yeah, you're definitely doing something. Um, yeah, of course, we saw of course, we have Cody Rhodes, versus Sami Zayn.
Pretty much as far as as far as that's concerned. Some unfinished business, if you will. And then for the United States Championship match, Carmelo Hayes versus Baron Corbin, and the winner of this match is still U.S. champion Baron Corbin. And we have another great CM Punk and Kevin Owens promo. I was like, oh man, and of course this is ahead of their WWE Championship match. Next weekend, of course, coming up in Toronto. Of course, the KO's stomping grounds, if you will. And we saw that CM Punk cut off Kevin Owens before he could say a word, enter into a thunderous ovation to the dismay of his number one contender. And it was definitely a very tense verbal showdown which took place. And of course, with KO, knocking Punk's history of burning bridges, it's like, yeah, what I mean, and of course, it's not the only time that that somebody has addressed that, because we all know that Punk is definitely a habitual bridge burner. What I mean, and of course, KO brought up how the reason why Punk came back was because he had no other options. He had no other choice. And I mean, exactly. And of course, it included reference to the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega and AEW without actually naming them. And and of course, the beratement Punk dealt against young KO, 20 years ago on the Indies. You know what I mean? And and not only that, but of course, Punk drew a lot of criticism for a certain line that they made, where said, of course, instead of but saying something like, instead of facing Obafemi, he's facing endometriosis. Talking about KO. Like, it was definitely definitely a low blow as far as his weight. There's definitely a weight joke. I was like, yeah. It's, of course, the battle insults concluded. The prize fight, KO claiming he'll beat Punk next week, while the champion vowed to put KO to sleep. And it was every bit the intense confrontation that fans would hope for. You know what I mean? So this was definitely a CM Punk dream match. For me, since he made his return. So he's definitely been getting those programs out the way. Of course, the Drew McIntyre feud, an excellent feud. Seth Rollins, amazing feud. Roman Reigns, great feud, especially, which led up to an amazing, an amazing WrestleMania match. And so now he's got Kevin Owens on his hands. Of course, they had Cody Rhodes as well, but of course now he's got KO on his hands as well. Two ROH legends, and I'm definitely looking forward to that. And we have a triple threat ladder match for the a triple threat match, excuse me, triple threat tag match for the WWE tag team titles, and the winners of this match, of course, in the new tag team champions, the MFTs. And also, of course, congratulations to JC Jane for now becoming the new Women's United States champion by defeating Tiffany Stratton. And of course, it was great to see Fatal Influence start their journey of racking up the titles. Of course, we saw that there was a brawl between Cody Rhodes and Randy Orton. That closed out the show close out the show. And so I would say that probably the MVP of SmackDown, the biggest highlight was Chelsea Green. And so now, when it comes to of course, Monday Night Raw. Let's go into it. Man, like I said, as far as that, some of the highlights included Solo Sikoa shockingly betraying, well, not really a shock, by betraying the Bloodline. Of course, they're aligned with LA Knight. Meanwhile, Chad Gable successfully retained his Intercontinental Championship. And so I'm going to go into highlights of this. And of course, the lineup for this was the Bloodline delivering Solo Sikoa to Roman Reigns. We have the Intercontinental Championship match with Chad Gable versus Rey Mysterio, absolute legend, literal Hall of Famer, by the way. The number one contenders tournament Rey Fenix versus El Fiscal. Then we have another number one contenders tournament match with Dragon Lee versus El Hijo de Doctor Wagner Jr., whatever, and Sol Ruger versus Lyra Valkyria. And so we see that, of course, that we have a tournament for a number one contenders match, to face Roman Reigns at AAA for the World Heavyweight Championship. So, Roman's going to face a luchador. So I'm ready for that. You know what I mean? So, of course, going to add another dimension to his game. We have Stephanie Valkyrie kicking off Monday Night Raw. man, of course, we saw that the Judgment Days. Of course, of course, we saw that. Of course, saw the Judgment Days. Roxanne Perez, women's Intercontinental Champion now, Raquel Rodriguez, and women's World Champion Liv Morgan reminded Stephanie Rockera and Becky Lynch that there is power in numbers to kick off Monday's show. So of course, La Primera called out Liv, who came out from the back, of course, accompanied by her lackeys. Of course, she said the criticisms facing her in the ring do not faze her because she's a champion for herself. Calling herself the greatest women's champion of all time. I was like, wow, okay. But yeah, that's typical. Like I said, typical Liv. You know what I mean? As far as that's concerned. But yeah, pretty much, Liv doing, what Liv does best. She's a natural heat magnet. Much like Dirty Dom himself. You know what I mean? So Stephanie was unimpressed. Of course, and she reiterated her demand for Morgan to come to the ring, and of course, 3-on-1 beatdown took place until Becky Lynch arrived to make the save, and of course, together they cleared the ring, and of course, so when attention started to rear its head, the heels definitely getting upper hand, leaving both of the number one contenders of course lying on the mat. And just Stephanie's aura and her, in-ring ability have helped her create a connection with, while the promos have, definitely improved by leaps and bounds. And of course, Liv is just a naturally unlikable heel anyway. And we have Javon Evans versus JD McBobblehead. The winner of this match, Javon Evans, but unfortunately, we have another attack from Big Cass. And I'm like, for what? Like the optics of it, just I don't know what it is. It just it just rubs me the wrong way. Like I said, for Big Cass to have another attack, another assault on the young OG Javon Evans. I'm like, come on, dude. It just oh my gosh. Like, come on, especially with the optics, in a climate like this. Like, come on now. Like, it's not, like I said, it's not Javon's fault, that you squandered 8 years. Like, it's not his fault at all whatsoever. But unfortunately, he's become a Cass's punching bag, and eventually that guy gets shut down. Then, like I said, for the number one contenders tournament match, Rey Fenix versus El Fiscal. Rey Fenix wins. Then we have Sol Ruca versus Lara Valkyria. Pretty nice match. Great match, by the like I said, great match. The winner of this match, Sol Ruca. And of course, we have like I said, Sol Ruca, the Surfer Lady, Surfer Lady versus the Bird Lady. And the winner of this match is the Surfer Lady herself, Sol Ruca. And so of course, Sol Ruca countered a Nightwing attempt, delivered a big DDT, and finished her off with a Soul Snatcher. Great match. Like I said, of course, the winner of this match, Sol Ruca. Then we have Bron Breakker calling out Obafemi. This is hilarious right here. This right here was absolutely hilarious. So we'll start off as a backstage promo featuring the Visions, Austin Theory, Logan Paul, Maxine Dupree, and Bron Breakker gave way to the latter. Of course, the Bron marched to the ring calling Obafemi. Paul Heyman interrupted and begged the question, who is the future of the WWE? Then, of course, the ruler himself, Obafemi, joined them in the ring. He mocked Bron Breakker in a very viral clip where he actually sounds exactly like Bron. He cooked him, using Bron's old voice, where he says, "Who's the future now, Paul?" I was like, "Oh, whoa!" Like, if you close your eyes, you would have thought that Bron Breakker was talking to himself. Oba is excellent with impressions. I mean, even back to NXT. You know what I mean? Like, there's a clip of him, changing his voice. I was like, wow. Like I said, if you close your eyes, you couldn't even tell that it was a 6'4", 300-pound Nigerian dude talking like that. You know what I mean? But then again, at the same time, Brock Lesnar, is very deceptive himself, because if you look at someone of Brock's size, you wouldn't even believe that a voice like that came out of him. Same thing with Shawn Michaels, you know what I mean? But I think it's pretty hilarious stuff. But yeah, like I said, as far as that, and of course, um, you know, Oba had to remind Bron. He reminded the fans, that of course, that Brock. He, like I said, reminded Braun Breaker. Of course, reminded the fans also that Brock Lesnar knows who the future is. You know what I mean? Like, of course, like I said, rather, um, like I said, even with him trolling Braun, like I said, he quickly reminded Braun, that the fans know, that Brock Lesnar knows, that the future of the WWE is Oba Femi. Plain and simple. You know what I mean? Matter of fact, this right here, right here. So if you want to talk about somebody who's going to be, who has the capability of being Roman Reigns' successor, you got it right there with him. Like my top two candidates are him and of course Trick Williams. If you want to talk about people that that you could put in that spot to be Roman's future successors, it's definitely them. Um, you know what I mean? So I was like, yeah, absolutely. And you know what I mean? And of course, like I see, the mind games continue, and it's just like it's Heyman with Braun Breaker. Is he possibly a line with Obafemi? You know what I mean? So Paul Heyman is definitely a chameleon. It's just like you never know what you're gonna get with him. You know what I mean? Or it's Heyman doing what he has done so many times in his career, playing both sides before revealing his choice at the right time. So I'm leaning towards the latter option where he's playing both sides, and eventually he's going to reveal, he's going to align himself, with who he sees as, as the perfect choice, the perfect fit. Um, so and like I said, I like this, as a way to, to break Braun free from the shackles of the Vision and to, just to reheat the nachos, and so that's pretty much what it is. Meanwhile, Obafemi has been on a monstrous run, defeating Brock Lesnar, two out of three times in their feud. And of course, also me vanquishing the Beast once and for all at SummerSlam in Minnesota. So I would say that when it comes to who I would like to see win this feud more, it's got to be Obafemi. Just because of his trajectory and what lies ahead of him. Especially with with a potential a championship match specifically against Roman Reigns. Especially after after that WrestleMania press conference. So definitely be long term booking, and of course in that aspect. For the number one contender, no, the other number one contenders tournament match, we have of course Dragon Lee defeat Wagner Jr. Um, and then for the Intercontinental Championship match, of course Chad Gable defeated the legendary Rey Mysterio to retain the IC title. And then last but not least, we have, last but not least, we have the Bloodline delivering Solo Sikoa to Roman Reigns. The Usos and Jacob Fatu deliver Solo Sikoa to the World Heavyweight Champion Roman Reigns, and the Usos were super duper geeked up about this one, like in ways I had never seen them geeked up before. I was like, man, and I think that was a way of getting back at their little brother anyway. So he's Solo's the youngest in the family anyway. So it was definitely like I know they couldn't wait for this moment. So of course we saw that Roman Reigns wasted no time berating and belittling his former enforcer, complete with a video package reminding him that it was the tribal chief who defeated him in tribal combat. Of course, in January of last year, when Raw first moved to Netflix, you know what I mean, and of course that was the main event of Raw anyway. Great match, by the way, and Roman looked amazing, with those Kobe nines, those Bloodline nines. But yeah, like I said, that's where their feud initially blew off at pretty much, and And of course, we saw that a few cheap shots left Solo line before LA Knight hit the ring. And so, of course, we saw that he fought off the bloodline to the numbers game proved too much, and Brains rocked him with a Superman punch. With Jimmy and Jay, of course, holding LA Knight, as I call him, logistics assistant Knight. Of course, Roman, of course, Reigns told Solo to, excuse me, Roman told Solo to attack Knight. Um, and so, of course, Solo had fame doing so too. Of course, before driving a stump directly into the tribal chief's throat, to a huge ovation from the fans. And of course, instead of like saying instead of taking out LA Knight, we see that Solo. Pew, 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 pew. You know what I mean? I thought that was hilarious. So I know a lot of people thought it was hilarious too. I mean, like I said, Solo is just a natural entertainer. Of course, he's the youngest. Like I said, the youngest sibling. So he definitely finds ways to to get at his older brothers, and I mean, like I said, when it comes to just that natural humor, like I said, it's one of the things that that you can't even contain. So I think it's best that that they keep this path for Solo. However, if I'm Solo, I would watch my back when it comes to LA Knight. Um, I don't see him wanting to form a long term, bond with Solo, because at the end of the day, LA Knight is looking out for one numero uno, looking out for himself. At the end of the day, he's going to be looking out for himself, and his eyes are focused on that World Heavyweight Championship. He's locked in on Roman Reigns. You know what I mean? Um, and so, and the thing is, the thing about that plan is that Solo is not a part of of that long term vision. No pun intended, but yeah. And I know that there were people who um, saw that segment and immediately wanted Solo to beat Roman for the title. Let me put it this way: it don't always work like that, right? Um, and I've been having conversations, with this, about this as well when it comes to local assistant night, logistics assistant night, right? And several others who are quote unquote over simply with the internet, you know, but may not be the best fit from a company standpoint. Because here's the thing: the landscape of wrestling is different now, right? And you know, with the path that Roman is on with this title run, you know, me personally, I would not jeopardize it just for a hot shot, a title reign, a trial run, title reign, and so especially I mean, if you look at recently with Sami Zayn, like, come on now, you think that you're going to interrupt, the vision and plan that they have for Roman at this point just for some instant gratification? Nah, I ain't doing that. Um, I know people. I know somebody bring up DDP as as an example for LA Knight, but at the same time, everybody's not gonna be him. There are some people who can only be in the category of of like a Roddy Piper, Mr. Perfect, Jake the Snake, dudes like that who are legends in their own right. Even without being world champions. It just so happens that Knight, LA Knight is in the same era and generation as just a just absolute legend. You know what I mean? Someone who's on a monumental, historic run in his career. You know what I mean? So, and like I said, once again, um, as I said on Twitter, especially when it comes solo, you know, like I said, like I said before, just because a guy like that is over with, with like 20,000, internet fans doesn't mean that, he's exactly, the best thing from a business standpoint. When it comes to someone who's gonna move the needle, you know, carry the title, ultimately carry the company. Solo is entertaining, but not to the point where I would, build a company around him, have him carry the company long term, things like that. You know what I mean? Um, like I said, I'm not one, for those, prisoner of the moment, type of takes. You know what I mean? Because the thing, because the thing is, you know, the thing is, too many people get caught up in, get caught up in the segment, and just because somebody did a great job like Solo did with this segment, I give him credit. I give him that much. He did excellent with this segment. But like I said, let's not get carried away. Of course, it doesn't guarantee that he's going to have a sustainable title reign. Um, you know what I mean? So as far as that, and I would just say this too. I feel as though you know, let Solo and Local Assistant Night, you know, be the next notches on Roman's belt. The same way that CM Punk and Seth Rollins became notches on Roman's belt. You know what I mean. So let Roman continue this march of history and the way that he is changing the narrative. Um, to prove that he can win without interference. I definitely like this storytelling. You know, and so yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, as far as that, and also of course Zillify too. Kicking off feuds against Grayson Waller. Um, and just making enemies everywhere. And and of course he did it pretty much. I could tell his shirt was definitely a tribute to The Rock. It reminded me of like 1999 or 2000 Rock. I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. And even they called himself was a nympho baby. I know it's hilarious, it's a nympho baby, but and the thing is, um, my thing is, like I said, my thing is as long as Zilla is around the right people. Um, what I mean? Like, as long as he's got the right people in his ear, not to sound cliche, but I think he's gonna go pretty far. But of course, but at the same time, I don't see Zilla as this huge make or break when it comes to this bloodline thing. And I know a lot of people online who have who've expressed their disdain, for the bloodlines, the Anawani family, and everything like that. But at the same time, let's just call it what it is. These Samoans, like I said, let's just call it what it is. These Samoans love to procreate. They love to reproduce, and of course, a lot of us, back then didn't know, how many, how many from that particular generation would come out and become wrestlers themselves. You know what I mean? So I was like, like none of us knew, how many, kids would come from Yokozuna, Rikishi, and Umaga's family line. You know what I mean? So of course, here we have it right here when it comes to Zilla. And and the thing is, it's just like we're just getting started. You know what I mean? So it's definitely going to be a ride. Um, and so that like I said, when it comes to the bloodlines, definitely like I said, business has been picking up even more. Um, and for the people who feel as though the bloodline is repetitive and overrated, overhyped, and all this other crazy stuff, I'll say it like this: until there are other wrestlers and other storylines that can draw more, money and viewers than the bloodline. Until that happens, this is the best we're gonna get. You know, um, and how the bloodline continues to draw in huge viewership numbers on YouTube, like 57 million or something like that. Whatever it is. I was like, yeah, they will always be best for business. They will always move the needle. You know what I mean? Um, And so yeah, so that's really what it is. Now, as far as birthdays, you know, recently, Paige, or Soraya, Soraya, also known as Paige, turned 34. Um, of course, on August 18th, Malcolm Jamal Warner, August 17th, Paige turned 34. August 18th, Malcolm Jamal Warner would have turned 56. Rest in peace, of course. On August 19th, former President Bill Clinton turns 80. Looks great. On August 20th, of course, the late great, Isaac Hayes would have turned 84. On the same day, Gunther turns 39. August 21st, Will Chamberlain will turn 90. You seen, of course, of course, basketball legend Will Chamberlain would have turned 90. Of course, I said the fastest runner of all time, Usain Bolt turns 40. Of course, August 22nd, the Godfather of Go-Go, Chuck Brown, would have turned 90. It was, of course, the Usos turned 41. On the same day, Paul Ellering turns 72. Of course, Apollo Crews turns 39. And, of course, on August 23rd, Kobe Bryant would have turned 48. And that's it for the birthdays. And before I go, I would like to give a word of wisdom. Is that, of course, my word of wisdom is that, it is imperative that we forgive others, extend forgiveness to others the same way that God extended forgiveness to us. And the thing is, of course, some people have the nerve to be judgmental to others after God has forgiven them. So the thing is, never be judgmental to other people after God has shown you mercy and forgiveness. Forgiveness is important for yourself. Of course, like I say, to put yourself, put your heart and mind in the right posture to be clean. Like I say, forgiveness, is important. But at the same time, access does not always have to be granted. It's not guaranteed. Forgiveness is the most important thing. I mean, like that's ultimately what it is. So if you're in a posture to not forgive, God will not forgive you. But if you are in a posture to forgive, God will certainly forgive. Forgive you Himself. So that's my word of wisdom. And always remember that that you're victorious because greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. When you put God in first place, you don't have to worry about being in the last place. Please make sure you listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that you download podcasts. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for watching. And may this day be the absolute very best day of your life.